Alright. 3.0 plus 1.0, Thrice Upon a Time. I have some feelings. I have a lot of feelings, especially after watching 3.33 earlier today. General impressions? Good. This was a strong ending to the Rebuild of Eva and to Eva in general. Like, this is the most concrete evidence that this series is in fact a sequel to Neon Genesis Evangelion. There is no room for doubt anymore. It is 100% a sequel. And the ending is befitting of that. We will get to that. It's not perfect. Not even close to perfect, if I'm being honest. We'll also get into that. So, we pick up with the main trio of pilots basically getting like a farmland arc, kind of. If you've read Vinland Saga, you know what I'm talking about. But essentially, they go to a like survivors village, like people who survived the third impact. Well, before we get to that, so I learned some details about what actually happened in the interim between 2.0 and 3.0 that technically exist in the movies, but in the stupidest fucking place possible. So, from what I've gathered, I had to have people explain this to me because I was so confused. So, from what I gathered, what Shinji did at the end of 2.0 was what's referred to as the near third impact, where he almost caused everything to be annihilated. And that was stopped by Kaoru coming down from the moon with one of the spears. Then that's in the movie. Apparently, in the interim between 2.0 and 3.0, Seele starts their own third impact, which Kaji stops and sacrifices himself to do so. And the only hints of it being in the movie are the fact that in Thrice Upon a Time, we learned that Kaji died doing this. And the other part is in the next movie preview of 2.0. That doesn't count. Because no one's watching that expecting it to be anything but a preview of the next movie. That's bullshit, Anno. I'm sorry, but that's bullshit. So, doesn't change anything, by the way. That doesn't change anything about my feelings for 3.0. Everyone still acted like a fucking ass for for not good reasons and not logical character writing. In any case, so that happened. So yada yada. Kaoru blows up at the end of 3.0. And they get sent off to this village where they basically relearn how to be people. Which was a really interesting arc. Like, just... Obviously, it had to open with an action scene, which... Fine. But... I like that basically like the first 40 minutes of this movie, aside from that action scene, are just probably longer than that actually. It might be closer to an hour. The first massive chunk of this movie is just character building and like just character building. And that's real this is the moment that I was hoping for throughout 3.0 that I never got. Just this really slow burn, but well paced and very interesting character writing. New Rey basically learns how to be human. It's almost like it's like an alien trying to learn what human culture is, and it's really good. Also, like the first like 30 minutes of this movie made me go like, they made me go, okay, I understand why it took 8 years for this movie to come out, because like there's the best character acting and like earth effects, animation and plant effects and stuff that I've ever seen in this opening half hour. It's fucking gorgeous. So yeah, Rey's arc is really good. Shinji eventually recovers from the trauma of the everything. And see, this is like when Toji and Kensuke show up again, and they're immediately super fucking nice to Shinji because they are proper adults and understand, oh yeah, this guy's suffered a whole bunch of trauma. We need to be nice to him. Now, as I explained in the 3.0 video, Misato and the rest of them should have already had that knowledge in them, but for some reason that was just written out of the movie. And so Thrice Upon a Time does what I like to refer to as damage control, where they basically rewrite all of the characters at will, like Misato's group, so that they didn't want to be mean to Shinji, but they had to. Which, no, they didn't have to. They didn't have to be mean and awful about it. That was their choice. They could have very easily explained to him the entirety of what was happening. So, I have not forgiven 3.0 in any regard. So, better late than never that Thrice Upon a Time addressed this, but this is definitely something that should have been in 3.0. So, at least we got it in this one. And it's really good. Asuka notwithstanding. I actually think like Asuka being a massive cunt still makes sense in this, because like it's eventually like it's slowly revealed that she like I don't expect Asuka to have proper human emotions. As someone who heavily identifies with Asuka, I do not expect her to have proper human emotions. But so her just being a complete ass to Shinji, basically forcing food down his throat, that being the only way that she can like properly communicate with him and keep him alive, like not dying from malnutrition, that I found really interesting to be really interesting character writing. So yeah, that made sense. But everyone else was like super fucking nice to Shinji, like really just being like, take your time, we'll come back to this when you're ready. It's almost like they were all licensed therapists. Which I guess in this post-Third Impact world, they had to learn. Like, you have to learn how to deal with people. on a much deeper level if you want to keep society functioning. So, and it was just a very slow and healing experience. And it took me a little bit to understand why Shinji eventually gives that up and goes back to Misato's group and such. But the reason for that is being that he finally concludes that he needs to confront his father. He needs to talk to Gendo. And we'll get to that bit in a little while, but a solid conclusion. I was hoping to be a little more upset with New Ray like disintegrating into LCL. And I thought that would have a much bigger traumatic impact on Shinji, but I guess it didn't. But it was fine. Like, we finally got to the true core of Rei as a character. That she just wants to understand Shinji. She wants to understand other people because she was not gifted humanity. Now there was one line. It's almost that I'm not gonna say it's a throwaway line, but it's like not dwelled on at all. Where Asuka basically says, "Hey, all of us were basically genetically engineered to love Shinji," and then it's not really touched on again, which I'm like, I don't think we needed that. Although Rei does have a good counter argument to that, where she says, "Well, that's fine. I'm happy, so it doesn't matter to me." So I enjoyed that. I feel like I had some... I'm trying to remember all the other issues I had with this before I get to the really good stuff. Because this is a massive fucking movie. It's 2 hours and 35 minutes. So it's like one of the longest anime films ever. I don't know where exactly it ranks. I think it's either number 2 or number 5. I can't remember which one it was. But this is a very dense movie. Like, there's not a lot of padding in that 2.5 hours. It's all, like, with the exception of some fight scenes, it's all very pertinent information. Oh yeah, speaking of fight scenes, I guess I could say Mari is just kind of there. Like, she doesn't, like... I was hoping she would have a bit more of a meaningful character in this than she does. But she's basically just there to be the one to ship with Shinji at the end. And that's another one. My old complaint is, like, the ending is a little too tidy. Like, they just pair off all of the main characters in, like, weird shipping things. Like, Kaoru and Rei are together. Like, it doesn't like totally say it's a romantic relationship, but it's just weird that, like, everything just sort of falls so neat and tidy into place. I was hoping for something a little bit dirtier, but yeah, so was hoping for Mari to be a little more developed, but not so much, which is unfortunate because she could have been a really interesting character as the only sane person there. Still have some issues with the CG. It's not super bad, except the spear fight at the end between Shinji and Gendo, where they're like hitting each other with the spears through the city. That looked super fucking goofy. I'm sorry. It looked so silly looking and just not real feeling in any sense. Maybe the intent was for it to feel a little staged, but It just didn't work for me. Because all the other scenes after that, where it's like 2D animated, looked really cool, where they're going through all the different memories and stuff. That looked awesome. But, yeah, some of the CG still looks really wonky in this. Unfortunate. But, yeah, that's most of my complaints. To cap off, yeah, one last thing. To cap off the whole redemption arc, I feel like it needed to be just a little bit firmer with the idea that Shinji was shutting himself off, but he really wasn't wrong for, like, I kind of disagree with this movie's moral assertment in a way. Like, it's not, in theory, it's not good to shut yourself off from other people and to just completely shut down. But Shinji's case is extreme. Like, everything in his life failed him up to that point. His entire support structure crumbled beneath him and chastised him for doing things that they said were wrong, but he had no clue of knowing were wrong. And the end of the village arc in this doesn't 100% come out and say that. And it, like, kind of muddies the water a little bit by making Shinji partially take the blame for some of it. And I just disagree with that, I guess. There are other things that Shinji was wrong for, but the things that the movie kind of implies Shinji was wrong for, I disagree with. So, but in the end, it does sort of circle back to resolving that in an interesting way, I think. Again, 2.5 hour movie, a lot of information. So, then we got, Farmland arc finished, the Village arc finished. A lot of stuff happened in the middle that I don't quite remember. See, now I'm trying. There was the bits with the flashback with Kaji and stuff. And basically just the prep for the final fight against Gendo. Wow, I'm totally blanking on all of the stuff that happened. Because I feel like there was an interim there. Did it just lead straight into the final fight? It might have. Because I think the Village arc lasted like a solid hour. A solid hour and change. And then the final fight was like 50 minutes long. At the very least. And there was some lead up to that. So I guess there wasn't a huge lot of transition between the two. At least not enough to make me remember it. But so final fight happens. Asuka goes full angel. That was interesting. And gets pulled into Unit 1, or Unit 13, I guess, which is also Unit 1. Or, no, it's not quite. No, it's Unit 13. Okay. Gets a little complicated. Then the movie goes full anime and creates an anti-universe that Gendo goes into in order to trigger the final impact. Also, Gendo finally taken off the glasses to reveal that he's just completely removed his humanity via his eyes being gone and replaced with like a cross-shaped hole in his head. That was pretty fucking cool. But so Shinji goes into the anti-universe to fight Gendo, and eventually they realize they just have to talk it out, and we get the notion that was very heavily implied throughout all of Neon Genesis and End of Evangelion, but is only like fully realized here, is basically Gendo is massively autistic in a sense. Like, he cannot function properly with other people. Like, I can't even say like he's just antisocial. Like, the way they describe this is just autism. Which, bold move. So, and he is just turned into this very, like, not even lonely. Like, again, that's another thing that makes me think that way, is like he never perceives himself as being lonely. Like, he just completely shuts himself off because he doesn't like dealing with people. And then we also get, and again, we get a line where he's like, he's literally trying to blend fantasy and reality together. Like, that's one of the exact lines in the movie, which is a huge metatextual take about anime fans. I see what you did there, Ano. I see what you did there. But that was cool. We just get this total, like, heart spilling out of Gendo, showing that Yui was the only thing in his life that allowed him to connect with others, and him losing that was completely unbearable. And he didn't realize until this final moment that in order to keep Yui alive within himself, he needed to stay with Shinji. Like, that repeat of him leaving Shinji at the train station, like, they turn it down and Gendo just kneels down to him and hugs him. And this was the redemption that Gendo really needed. Like, in End of Evangelion, he just dies a bad guy. But here, sorry, it's a little late in the day. I've been tired all day, probably from this. But I really enjoyed Gendo's character in this movie. And then once Shinji's done with that, he, again, Christ figure, he goes through all of his friends. He goes to Asuka and then to Rei, goes to Asuka and then Kaoru and then Rei, and helps them understand the traumas in their lives so that they can move past it. Which, I pointed this out on Twitter, but at the end of, like, in my 2.0 review, I kind of concluded that this new Asuka was an okay Asuka, but she wasn't the Asuka that I so deeply, heavily identified with. And then we get to the end of this movie, and I'm like, oh, I was wrong. I was so wrong. Here comes the pain again. So yeah, we really dive a bit deeper into Asuka in this movie. Still not quite as extensive as Neon Genesis, but this is a much more complicated Asuka, which I appreciated. So we got that. We actually got some character development on characterization on Kaoru. I'm not sure if that was needed, and it kind of just felt like it was pulled out of thin air, but it was interesting to have, and it sort of draws a parallel between him and Rei, where they just both want Shinji to be happy. And what Shinji points out to them is, that's great, but you also need to make yourself happy. And so he fixes Asuka, he fixes Kaoru, he fixes Rei. And just, removes Evas from the world entirely at the end. But it's not him that does it. He doesn't have to sacrifice himself. His mom shows up at the very end because that's where she is apparently. She's like in the anti-universe. I think it works fine thematically, I think. It's a bit of a wrinkle, but I'm good with it. Having Shinji die at the end would have been a little bit of a sour moment, if I'm being honest. So, Yui taking on protecting her child one last time was a fitting moment. And then we get a world with no Evas. Now, I am very iffy when it comes to characters rewriting the world so that to erase the bad things from it, because also that seems entirely antithetical to Evangelion as a whole. But I think in this instance, like, they still all seem to remember their traumas. Like, they've grown. At least I like to think they have. Like, it's not there's no implication that these characters don't remember these events. So I'd like to think that they do. And we get this nice, tidy little ending where Shinji goes off into the real world to be a salaryman or something. Bit of a depressing ending in terms of the workforce, but you do you, Shinji. But yeah, and that's the ending. Two final notes I guess I have are color direction is way better in this movie. I don't know. I guess they just finally figured it out. I am still sick of the color red though. Like I'm staring at this like. It's close to this color. I never want to see this fucking color red ever again. It's nauseating. But yeah, art direction was better. The final ending, like where Gendo and Shinji are having their mind duel of sorts, it was absolutely phenomenal in terms of storyboarding and layouts and color direction and animation and stuff, and they incorporated shots from End of Evangelion and Neon Genesis. Again, that's the scene where like we prove once and for all that this is a sequel. And the soundtrack was honestly the weakest that it's been in all the movies. Like there's like 3 insert songs during the village arc, 2 or 3 insert songs that are just soft acoustic music, which I just find boring. I was hoping for something a little more interesting, just a nice instrumental. I loved that they picked Ode to Joy for Misato delivering the final weapon to Shinji, though. Or not Ode to Joy. Ode to Joy was the 3rd movie. Joy to the World was this one. Which, it signals a rebirth. Joy to the World is a Christmas song. So it's the birth of Christ. So this is signaling a rebirth of Shinji and finally settling all of this and setting the world right again, I guess. Yeah, aside from that, aside from the insert songs, the music was actually pretty solid. Especially they pulled out the OG final, I think it's called Final Decision or something. The final they pulled out the original version of that track for one of the fights, and it was just so cool. So that's it. That's all of the rebuilds. That's all of Evangelion. Fucking 26 years in the making. Or 25 and a half, I guess you could say. But, yeah. In the end, I'm glad I watched it. It wasn't perfect. It had some really fucking low points. But overall, I am satisfied. It definitely could have been better, but I am satisfied. If Neon Genesis and End of Evangelion are about learning to love yourself, then the Rebuild of Evangelion is about learning to love others. And I think that's the only way this could have possibly ended. And that's all I have to say. Thank you, Ano, for sticking with this, sticking to what you thought was right, I assume, through all of this. I don't agree with all of your decisions, but you certainly gave me a thrill ride. In terms of scores, I realized I only gave a score for the first movie throughout these, so I'm going to say 1.0 is a 1.0, I'll give a 6. 2.0, I gave an 8. 3.0, I gave a 3. And Thrice Upon a Time, it's like in the 7 to 8 range. Again, there's still a lot of stuff in it that I don't agree with, but that last 40 minutes was just really solid, and it gave me exactly what I wanted. So I'll give it a very light 8. There was a lot of good stuff in this. Not all good stuff, but a lot of good stuff. So, for the entirety... I mean, if I were to give this a true average, so that'd be 25 divided by 4 is like a 6.25. But 3.0 was the outlier. I'm going to say the Rebuild of Evangelion as a whole gets a solid 7. It's good. I would recommend it with the caveat that 3.0 sucks. I'm sorry, it still sucks. That's all I have to say. Goodbye, all of Evangelion.